Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Thanksgiving Day. Thanks for joining us here in Alaska Weather on November the 22nd for your very latest weather information around Alaska. Even on holiday, we're here 365 days a year and privileged to serve you. So we are thankful that you are watching Alaska Weather and helping your community stay safe tonight. You can always check on the latest forecast 24/7 on the phone, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online, weather.gov/Alaska, and from there, a simple click will get you to aviation forecasts, river forecasts, ice information, TV weather graphics, which are on every single one of our pages there. And of course, if you can't find what you're looking for, email me, please, david.snider@noaa.gov. I'm happy to help you any way I can. Just drop me a line and I'll see what I can do for you anytime. So happy Thanksgiving from my family to yours. I hope you and yours are doing well tonight. Here's a look out at Perryville from earlier today. We were looking at a generally clear sky in the region. You can see snow on some of the Alaska Peninsula range there, the Aleutian Range. And yeah, that's ash. A light amount of ash looks like obscuring some of the sky, just a little bit there, but nothing too heavy there. And the good news from the Alaska Volcano Observatory, our partners over at the United States Geologic Service, telling us that the volcano is no longer erupting at a level bad enough or strong enough and consistent enough that it needs that red level warning. So they've downgraded it to orange or a watchful status. So we still have some minor ash emissions coming out of that, kind of a low level eruption at this point, and still has some activity. And we're still watching it along with our Alaska AVO friends and of course the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit for all your pilots out there. Make sure you're checking in for any of the latest SIGMET updates. And if you have any really amazing pictures, love to see them. Just be careful out there, of course. And as always, if we have more information for Perryville on the ground, if it looks like there's going to be an amount of ash that is coming your way, we will update that with an ashfall advisory for your community. But as of mid-afternoon, doesn't look like that's going to be the case, at least for right now. But as volcanoes are wont to do, they can change their minds at any moment. And the Alaska AVO folks will let us know what's going on. Turning our attention back to a little bit more of the classical weather picture, we are watching around the Bristol Bay region, especially around the Wood-Tikchik Mountains there, that we are going to be dealing with a little bit of snow and a little bit of wind, maybe about 6 inches of snow or so as we get into tomorrow and then tomorrow night into Saturday. It looks like a winter weather advisory is coming your way as snow develops in the region. So plan on the weather changing there in the Bristol Bay region. Generally, the northwest areas northwest of Dillingham as we get into Friday and Saturday. Other than that, it's fog for South Central, the Matanuska Valley, especially the Knik Arm and southward into the Anchorage region. They've been looking at some fog on and off pretty much all day long and making a pretty picture out there as we get into more of the Burl Ives kind of season there, the classical freezing fog on some of the trees, really starting to shape up in some parts of the Anchorage area. So if you want to get your camera and drive in Anchorage if you're in the area, check it out. It sure is pretty, but it does create some visibility problems if you're driving, certainly makes it hard to fly, and makes the road slick. So be careful out there if you're traveling up and down the Glen Highway or into the Parks Corridor. Here's a look at the satellite picture. Over the last 12 hours or so, you can see several circulations lined up across the north and eastern Gulf Coast, some of those sloshing in a little bit of rain across southern parts of southeast, all the way up to Sitka. Most of the northern panhandle appeared to be dry when I checked today. Around South Central, a clear sky above, but obviously not the case since we're talking about fog down below anyway. That's a cloud touching the ground. And across the interior, it was generally clear. A lot of what you're seeing here, though, is a lot of low-level cold air that the satellite is saying, oh, that looks like clouds to me. Well, it's obviously not. Conditions are fairly dry across most of the region, but there are some pockets of fog across the area, too. So especially Copper River Basin, all the way up toward Fairbanks, where we start to see a little more snow, and there's some snow flying across the north and western coast. The next big thing to watch, though, will be low pressure across the North Pacific. This system is deepening rapidly, and right now it's creating some stronger wind around Adak and Atka, out toward Nikolsky and Alaska, a little bit more of a southeasterly flow out ahead of that front. This entire system is creeping its way eastward, pushing away the remnants of high pressure that has kept things generally quiet for most areas, save for the fog, of course, for south central and southwestern Alaska. As we look at the loop one more time, also pay attention to what we see in the north, and that's clouds moving in from northeast, moving westward there. The winds have been a little bit on the breezy side, blustery side across the region, and that should continue as low pressure is working its way eastward. The weather that we see up north will be wrapping into that from the east and north. So this entire system is going to be under that control of the upper level trough that you'll see in the jet stream map here in just a few minutes when we check on that during our aviation weather. And make sure you stick around for that as well, because I've got took that Vinny Eminoff picture and turn that into a loop from our friends over at the FAA. So we're certainly thankful for them and their weather cameras around Alaska today. 977 millibars there across the central chain. The front just sneaking its way into the southern Bering across southeastern Alaska. Another front banked up across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. A little bit of rain that we talked about there. And up north it is cold enough for snow, but there sure is a lot of dry air across south central and the middle Tanana Valley out toward the Kuskokwim and the lower mid-Yukon. Up north, it is snow for the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound region into the Brooks Range, and for areas generally east of Utqiagvik all the way out toward Kaktovik. Some light snow there, but nothing really much to write home to Mom and Dad about. As far as tonight's weather goes, showers will continue across the outer coast. Generally, north and central parts of the Panhandle look pretty dry. There will be areas of fog around the Copper River Basin. Low pressure sits just outside of Seward at 1,001 millibars, and that's really where the circulation and the air currents are kind of coming together. It's really not anything too substantial at all. The big beast in town is going to be what we see across the North Pacific at 966 millibars, pushing the front into the southern parts of the Bering and eventually into the Alaska Peninsula. So while we were a little worried about ashfall coming into the Perryville area yesterday, that was mainly due to the north winds that we were looking at last night and today. With this weather system, we're going to get back into that southerly flow, so that should not be an issue no matter what, Vinny Eminoff. That's so easy to say really fastly when you're not thinking about it. But when you do, you try it. Vinny Eminoff. There you go. See? Easy for me to say. That's going to put southerly winds over the volcano and push that into southern and eastern parts of the Bering Sea. Now, rain and snow is going to move around the Pribilovs there as we get into tonight, and with this low pressure system deepening and crawling eastward, that's probably going to keep the winds going up through the central and eastern chain at very least. Up north, the front that doesn't really want to leave or go away is still hanging out around the Brooks Range. It's trying to be a cold front, meaning that colder air is trying to push its way southward. So we did add the little directional arrows on here saying it's trying to come this way. But we still have high pressure across a large part of southwest, south central, and even northern parts of southeastern Alaska, despite what you see here with the low pressure system. This is really kind of a higher pressure area, and that's keeping that from moving southward. And we have low pressure across the North Pacific that's wanting to move eastward, so this is going to end up controlling everything. And look what happens. Nothing really moves very much for Friday. A 961 millibar low. They're still hovering around the central chain, but the core of those winds looks like it shifts eastward a little bit more. So we're going to keep that southerly wind going for Nikolsky and Alaska, Dutch Harbor, all the way out toward Cold Bay, False Pass, eastward up toward Port Huyton. The winds pick up for the Kodiak Island area, a little more rain for you. And notice in southeast, that low pressure system just shifts just enough to pull a little more cloud cover southward and maybe break up the clouds for a large part of the northern Panhandle. But again, you could start off with some fog in the morning. And here comes that cold front, just creeping southward slowly. A little bit of snow around Arctic Village, Fort Yukon, north and east toward Kaktovik, maybe as far west as Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse if you're lucky. And blowing snow with that. It looks like the pressure gradient will be tight enough for snow. Now, as we get into Friday and Saturday, it looks like this moisture is moving northward. There could be enough for some snow to develop, especially as we go into Saturday for parts of the Wood-Tikchik Mountain area and into the Kuskokwim Delta, and maybe the northern parts of the Bristol Bay region. So keep your eyes on that. A winter weather advisory will be in effect, and again, you could see maybe around 6 inches of snow or so. Now, one of the waves of low pressure that starts out here across the southern Gulf zips north real quick as we get into Friday and Saturday. That's going to put a front right along the outer coast. That's going to change the winds, increase the pressure difference there as that blows through. And as that happens, watch for some snow and rain across the region, especially rain for southeast. But as we get into Saturday and Sunday, the weather's going to be changing a lot more for southeast, so you want to keep an eye on the weather forecast there, because behind that is that main low pressure system across the western Gulf and North Pacific. At 959 millibars, it's going to be doing at least a couple things, and this is for everyone in the Gulf. First of all, the winds are coming up for a large part of the Gulf of Alaska, and that means the seas are coming up for a large part of the Gulf of Alaska. And as this moves eastward slowly through Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, this will eventually start to affect southeastern Alaska a lot more with very sensible weather changes. In the meantime, it looks like most of South Central, especially the Anchorage to Kenai area and northward toward Palmer and Wasilla, is going to be kind of in that drier, downslopey wind kind of pattern there. But Prince William Sound, Seward, Homer, you're going to be dealing with a lot of what this low pressure system has to offer, and that could be rain and snow in all those areas. And across Southwest, snow should be falling across your region there, and areas just to the north of that, especially the Yukon Valley into the Seward Peninsula, may be dealing with blowing snow on top of that. Conditions seem to be drying up for the North Slope, and guess what? That front never went anywhere, so it's back to being a stationary boundary for Saturday. Let's take a look at temperatures as we get into your Friday morning. It looks like temps in the upper 20s to mid 30s for Southeast, South Central in the teens and 20s. Cool night for Kodiak at 24, 6 below in Fort Yukon, 14 below in Utqiagvik, 3 below in Kaktovik, 14 above in Shishmaref, almost 20 in Nome, 23 for Gamble, St. Lawrence Island, I should say, yeah, Subunga. And about 10 around Bethel, 3 below in McGrath. Bristol Bay temperatures in the single digits and low teens, 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, all the way out toward the chain, 33 in St. Paul, a high of 38 there tomorrow. 11 in Fairbanks, 2 below in Kaktovik, 7 above for Kotzebue and the Kivalina area, 8 above in McGrath, just a few degrees warmer there in Galena. Fairbanks about 11 degrees, 20s and 30s for South Central and the Kenai Peninsula, right on the money for the average this time of the year, and closer to 40 in Southeast. That's a look at your back to work Friday afternoon. Now, it looks like temperatures will be warming up for South Central going into the week.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And here's how the Veniaminoff volcano looked earlier today. This is a morning series of pictures there from the FAA weather camera there stationed at Perryville, looking to the northwest, I believe, from Perryville up the mountain there toward Veniaminoff. And you can see continued ash emissions there, though that has significantly changed just in the morning hours there. The ashfall advisory from the overnight hours has been allowed to expire. So on this Thanksgiving Day, the National Weather Service, and I'm sure the folks in Perryville and everywhere else, glad to have the FAA weather cameras there and our partners at the Alaska AVO that are keeping watch on our active volcanoes around the entire state and certainly right there at Veniaminoff. Here's a flying weather. Right now we're looking at MVFR conditions for most of the Bering, the Aleutians, and really a good chunk of the Gulf of Alaska, with the exceptions of north and eastern coastal areas and around South Central. As we get into the interior, IFR conditions continue for generally everywhere north of the Alaska Range, west of the coast, and just about to the Brooks Range passes there. So we'll start off with plenty of IFR, but you can see by tomorrow afternoon, conditions rapidly improve in most areas, not all areas. IFR for the upper Yukon and the upper 40-mile, or the upper Tanana and the 40-mile country area, as well as the Copper River Valley. Parts of Prince William Sound, especially around Portage Pass. Southeast still looking pretty good. VFR there for Fridays we were talking about yesterday, and then MVFR fairly widespread for the Aleutians and most areas north of the Yukon Delta into Kotzebue Sound, where it starts to clear up a little bit. Saturday morning we're back into the IFR for most of our mountain areas in the Alaska Range, a large part of the Kuskokwim Valley, the Yukon Valley, pretty hit and miss until you get back into the uplands there. And for parts of the North Slope, you'll watch for some IFR coming out of Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, the Chukchi Coast, looking at IFR. And then you start to see some changes here in Southeast for Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, we're back into MVFR for most of the region. Southwest, IFR is fairly widespread. Same goes for areas around Shelikof Strait, the Alaska Range, all the way down toward Chignik. And then most of Prince William Sound looking at IFR throughout the day into the Copper River Valley. Cook Inlet, MVFR for your Saturday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions for Friday there. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect to see IFR to start with some improvement toward MVFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, though, look pretty good. VFR there. MVFR to start for Rainy Pass. As we get to Windy Pass, IFR conditions are expected. Same goes for Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see IFR to start, and then a lot of improvement throughout the day to VFR. As we get to Tanita Pass, expect IFR conditions there. Portage Pass leaning over to IFR as the day goes on from a start at MVFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass probably having the best day of the next few up to VFR conditions for Friday. Your freezing levels show that surface freezing line nudging up just a little bit closer to St. Matthew and Nunivak Island north of St. Paul. The levels aloft up to about 2,000 feet for most of the Aleutians and part of the Alaska Peninsula, and then taking a jog over the western Gulf and then hovering right over a large part of southeastern Alaska with the surface freezing line just a skosh north of that, but most of the state well below freezing, both at top and just off the ground. Icing potential then is somewhat limited. You'll notice generally above 6,000 feet here across the southern third of the Bering Sea, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, southwestern Alaska and the Alaska Peninsula there, and the central chain. Hit and miss up north, in fact, offshore the North Slope above 1,000 feet there, and then southeast and south central and the interior for the most part looking okay. The jet stream has our main trough now moving to the east over the western parts of Canada, western lower 48, and then a ridge of high pressure developing over the Gulf, and then another trough digging in behind that with some substantial cross-Pacific or trans-Pacific speeds there at 145 to 150 knots. That's going to energize that next storm we've been watching moving out of the North Pacific. There it is. And you can see the south winds, or the winds coming in on the south side of that at 65 knots. A broad southerly flow coming up southwestern Alaska, 20 to 35 knots. And then southerlies on the ridge over the Gulf, pushing in winds around 40 to 50 knots over the open waters there. Interior winds still coming in from the west and southwest, 15 to 20, a northeasterly wind over the North Slope at 30 knots, light winds over southeast. At 3,000 feet, our ridge is intact here as well. Southerlies are picking up to 50 knots over the open water. Northwesterlies over southeast at 10 knots. Light winds over the interior. North and easterly winds, though, still going strong for the North Slope, 50 knots just offshore the Chukchi coast. And then south and westerly winds ramping up over the chain and over southwestern Alaska as strong as 50 knots at this point. So we'll be watching for turbulence tomorrow pretty much along the Alaska Peninsula and over the Aleutians below 4,000 feet. A lot of that reaching considerable moderate at least. A little bit of chop across the areas outside of Yakutat and Cordova below 6,000 feet. We'll call that isolated moderate. And up across the northwest coast below 4,000 feet. Watch for some chop north and west of the Brooks Range. We'll be back with your Marines in a moment.
The Pleiades and their cousins.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dehne Regis, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. Quick, Dehne, what are the names of the seven sisters?
Okay, there's Alcyone, Maya, Merope, Sterope, Taygeta, Kailano, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Electra.
Ooh, nice job. These are the names of the seven daughters of Atlas.
And there are also stars in the brightest cluster in the sky. Known as the Pleiades, the seven sisters make a great sight in the evening skies.
As fall starts heading to winter, I always look forward to seeing not one, but two star clusters in the sky. The starry cousins of the Pleiades, nicknamed the Hyades, aren't too far away.
Where can you find the sisters and their cousins? We'll show you how to spot the entire family up there. Let's show you.
Okay, we have our sky set for any night this week at 8 p.m. facing east. Let's find the seven sisters cluster first, since it's the brighter one.
1/3 the way up, when you face east, at first glance you might miss them. The Pleiades may look like a small faint cloud at first, but if you gaze a little deeper, you may be able to pick out 5, 6, or 7 individual stars in the cluster.
For the ancient Greeks, the Pleiades were a group of sisters fleeing the amorous advances of Orion the Hunter, and they only escaped by divine intervention. The gods took pity on the sisters and turned them into doves. They flew away from Orion and landed up in the sky where they sit today. Do they look like a little dove to you?
I can kind of see that, but a sharp-eyed first grader told me what he saw instead.
What's that?
Well, you know, there's a Big Dipper and a Little Dipper, right?
Uh-huh.
He called this the Dinky Dipper.
I like it.
I know they're called the Seven Sisters, but the Pleiades star cluster really consists of hundreds of stars. The 7 brightest sure look like a Dinky Dipper, but zoomed in we can see a lot more.
Let's label the sisters Dehne named earlier. The brightest is called Alcyone. Forming the rest of the bowl is Merope, Electra, and Maya. The fainter sisters are Sterope on the top, Taygeta, and then Kailano.
But what are the 2 brighter stars making the handle of this Dinky Dipper? Those stars bear the names of the parents, Atlas and Pleione. So when you're straining to see the 7 sisters with the naked eye, sometimes you can see a parent or 2 and miss a dimmer sister.
This cluster was formed from one huge nebula and is about 400 light years away from us. These blue stars are massive. Alcyone, for instance, would be 10 times wider than our sun and shine 2,400 times brighter.
Now let's find the other star cluster, the Hyades. Look for a sideways V shape of 5 stars below the Pleiades. This is the face of the constellation Taurus the Bull.
Anchoring the bottom left of the V shape is a really bright orange star named Aldebaran. And
Bullseye!
yep, Aldebaran marks the eye of Taurus the Bull.
The stars in and around the V shape are really part of a large open cluster of stars called the Hyades. You can see some of the brighter Hyades with the naked eye and lots more with a pair of binoculars.
The Hyades are the closest open star cluster to Earth at only 150 light years away. In total, there are about 250 stars in the cluster.
So keep an eye on this part of the sky later in the week, because on November 22nd and November 23rd, the nearly full moon will be nearby. In fact, it'll look like the moon hopped over the Hyades from one night to the next.
So there you have it. Look to the east after sunset for the 2 clusters.
The brighter and easier to find cluster is the Pleiades, aka the Dove, aka the Dinky Dipper.
And the fainter one inside the face of Taurus the Bull is the Hyades. If you have a pair of binoculars, definitely get them out and behold the many stars within the 2 clusters.
The universe is amazing when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a look at your sea ice edge. No new ice in Cook Inlet just yet. We've seen hints of ice up around the Turnagain Arm area, but nothing too much going on in the Knik either. As we look up further north, you'll notice that the ice edge seems to be building just a little bit further to the west there along that marginal ice zone showing up in blue. We lost a little bit of ice across the north coast of the Seward Peninsula there around the Shishmaref area and stuff, but we're still looking at somewhat high concentrations along the coastline itself, even though that ice edge has been reduced just a little bit, and we continue to see some growth along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region there. This is the latest update for your Thanksgiving Day. You can check it out yourself at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, and make sure you head over and look at the outlook there for the next 3 months as well. Here's Friday's forecast for southeast. Northerlies coming down the inside passage, 10 to 25 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas across the north, and north and westerlies across the outer coast up to 15 knots in some cases. And you're looking at about 6 to 8 foot seas in most areas for Friday. As we get into Saturday, though, the response to that developing area of low pressure in the Gulf will be a southeast wind coming up the outer coast, 35 to 40 knots, looking at 13 to 16 foot seas, even 17 to 19 foot seas there across the northern Gulf west of Yakutat. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal, 3 foot seas there. Southeasterlies picking up in the Clarence Strait, 25 knots with a 7 foot sea for places like Ketchikan and Metlakatla as we get into Saturday. South Central, things are generally quiet around the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound for Friday. Light winds in the Sound, 10 knots, 2 foot seas there. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, 10 to 15. Southwesterlies around the eastern Barren Islands, and westerlies blowing away from the Kenai Peninsula and the fjords, 15 knots with a 4 foot sea on Friday. For Saturday, once again, in response to low pressure building in the Gulf, we kick in some strong easterly winds, 30 to 45 knots, 13 to 18 foot seas coming up sharply on Saturday. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound at 6 feet, with north and easterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, 25 to 30 knots, 11 to 12 foot seas there west of the Barrens and outside of Kashamak Bay. As we get into Friday in southwest, easterlies down the Bering Sea coast of the peninsula, 30 knots with a 6 to 7 foot sea. Southeasterly winds coming into Kodiak Island with a 5 foot sea in the western Gulf, 10 to 11 foot seas down the coast, and northeasterlies 15 knots, 3 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. By Saturday, again, low pressures building in the Gulf. This drives in an east and northeasterly flow through the entire region, about 20 to 30 knots in total, with 12 to 15 foot seas for the North Pacific. Northeasterlies in Shelikof Strait, 5 foot seas coming down the Bering Sea coast, 20 to 25 on Saturday. Out west, As you would expect, higher seas north of Kiska and Adak, as some of those seas reaching over 25 feet. But out across the chain, it looks like we'll be dealing with 18-foot seas on a north and northeasterly flow. For the central and eastern chain, some stronger winds coming in from the south and east for your Friday. 20-foot seas there along the Pacific coast and 13 to 16-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast for the central and eastern chain. Wind speeds there 25 to 30 knots. For Saturday, again, in response to that low pressure system shifting eastward, northerlies coming into the western chain 19 to 20 feet. You're looking at about 35 knots there, 25 to 35 knots for the central and eastern chain, with 11 to 18-foot seas for the central areas around Adak and Atka. Northeasterlies coming in for the eastern parts about 25 to 30, with 13 to 15-foot seas there at their max on Saturday. For the west coast, northeasterly winds blowing offshore, easterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Delta and over St. Paul and St. George, 30 to 35 in the southern areas with the higher seas there, and about 3 to 5-foot seas in the north with a 15 to 20 knot wind from the north and east on Friday. For Saturday, seas and winds come up just a little bit more as low pressure is working its way into the Gulf. This will have a stronger draw coming in from the north across the west coast. 25 to 30 knot winds in most areas. You're looking at about 5-foot seas inside of Norton Sound, 6-foot seas in the Kuskokwim Delta, and 10 to 13-foot seas there as you get out a little bit more into the water, St. Paul and St. George included. For the north, look for northeasterlies over the ice for the Beaufort Sea coast, 15 knots. East and northeasterly winds coming down the Chukchi coast, 25 to 35 knots with seas as high as 12 feet west of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. Northeasterlies blowing through Bering Strait as well with a 5-foot sea. On Saturday, no big change for the north coast there as we get toward the Chukchi and the open water. East and northeasterlies continue 25 to 35 with 11 to 12-foot seas for your Saturday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, no new information around Veniaminoff. It looks like the ashfall advisory has been allowed to expire. Color code's down to orange now, just a watch status from the Alaska Volcano Observatory. But southeasterly winds will be blowing through as low pressure is deepening in the west. We have dense fog advisory posted for the Anchorage area and the Matanuska Valley, and a winter weather advisory for southwest as snow is moving into the Wood-Tikchik Mountains in the northern end of Bristol Bay as we go into your Saturday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather and happy Thanksgiving.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.